What would you do if a girl fell out of the sky and landed bleeding on the roof of your car? Not a metaphor. Not a story someone tells at a dinner party to sound interesting. A real girl, falling from the third level of the parking structure beside Ashvale Conservatory onto the same old car Maren Whitlock had been parking there for 3 weeks, ever since St. Brennan Hospital closed its own lot to resurface it. 6:40 on a Sunday evening, mid-semester break. 4 cars left in the whole structure, and an October rain coming down, the kind that pulls the dark forward 2 hours ahead of schedule. Maren had just come off a 12-hour shift and hadn't even gotten her hand on the door. She heard the impact before she understood it. A heavy sound, short, final, the kind of sound 4 years in an emergency department teaches you to recognize even when you'd rather not. Then the windshield split, one long crack running in from the outside. She moved toward it. She always moved toward it. That was the problem with Maren Whitlock, 28 years of life, and not once had she walked away from someone who was bleeding, and it had cost her more than anyone knew. The girl was maybe 20, dark hair plastered flat against her face from the rain. Her left arm bent at an angle that turned Maren's stomach. She was breathing. Maren checked that first. Then she did the thing any emergency nurse does before she does anything else. She reached for the cracked phone lying half a meter away and swiped to the medical ID. There was no name on it, no next of kin, only a phone number, and beneath it, a single line the owner of that phone had typed in herself. "Call this number first. Do not call 911. Maren looked up. On the 3rd level, the stairwell door was still hanging open, knocking softly against its steel frame. There was still enough light for her to see it. There was also still enough light for whoever was up there to see her. Then she dialed. It rang twice. A man's voice answered, low, calm in a way that was frightening. No greeting, no name, one word. Speak. If you want to know what happened in the 4 minutes that followed. 4 minutes that pulled 2 people who should never have met into the same life. Leave a like so this story can reach more people. Share it with someone you think would understand. And subscribe, because there's a new story waiting for you here every week. Maren didn't waste time explaining who she was. She lifted the phone to her shoulder and pinned it between her ear and shoulder blade, while both hands were already braced on either side of the young woman's head to keep her neck still. And she spoke in the language that 4 years in the emergency department had honed into reflex. Female, around 20 years old, fell from a height of approximately 30 feet, landed on the metal roof of a car, still breathing. Respirations shallow, approximately 28 per minute. Radial pulse present, rapid, approximately 110. Responds to voice. Obvious deformity of the left arm, suspected trauma to the left side of the chest. No visible, massive external bleeding. She paused for a beat, then added, her voice as flat as though she were giving a report to the physician on duty, rather than speaking to a stranger. I haven't moved her. I won't move her. A silence followed on the other end of the line, and Maren recognized that it wasn't the silence of someone in a panic. It was the silence of a man who had just realized that the person speaking to him knew exactly what she was talking about. When the man's voice returned, it had changed. It was still low, still unhurried, but there was something else beneath it now. The thing a person could hear, only in a man who was holding something far too heavy and wouldn't allow himself to drop it. Who are you? I'm a nurse. Emergency department. St. Brennan Hospital. You have 30 seconds before I call 911. Don't. The word came out faster than anything else he had said, and that was precisely why Maren heard it most clearly. She stood motionless in the rain, with both hands holding the head of a stranger, and a very old anger rose inside her chest, the kind of anger she had believed she'd buried 3 years ago. I don't know who you are. I don't care who you are, but if you're telling me to leave a young woman lying on the roof of a car in the rain because you don't want an ambulance here, then let me tell you something. I've stood beside a stretcher before, and I don't intend to do it again. He didn't interrupt her. He let her finish. Then he spoke slowly and very clearly, one word at a time. I'm not asking you to leave the girl there. I'm asking you to keep her alive for 4 minutes. My people have a doctor. They have blood. They have everything an ambulance has, and they have one thing an ambulance doesn't. I know for certain that she'll make it out of there. Can you do that? Rain ran down inside Maren's collar, and she felt the cold slide along her spine. But her hands didn't move. She thought of the hospital corridor, of stretcher wheels rattling over tile, of the 40 minutes she had spent holding a hand that grew colder with every passing moment. She thought of how she had followed every procedure correctly that night, and how none of those procedures had saved anyone. 4 minutes, she said. But listen carefully. If her airway becomes obstructed, if she vomits, if I see her chest shifting unevenly, I'm calling 911 immediately, and you won't be able to stop me over the phone. You want me to keep her alive, then I'll do it my way. On the other end of the line, there was silence for exactly 1 beat. Then, reasonable. The call didn't end. She heard a car door open, heard someone receiving orders spoken at half volume, heard some other world turning around that man the way water turns around a stone. Maren set the phone down on the roof of the car and switched on the speaker, then took off her coat. The wind struck the thin layer of clothing underneath, and the cold cut through her at once. She didn't notice. She laid the coat over the young woman's chest and abdomen, careful not to press against the left arm, careful not to shift her neck by even a fraction of an inch. Then she returned both hands to their former position, 10 fingers cradling either side of the young woman's head as though she were holding something made of glass. She spoke, not to the man on the other end of the line, but to the person lying beneath her hands. Listen to me. Don't move. Don't try to sit up. I'm here now. The young woman's eyelids fluttered. Then they opened, revealing 2 dark eyes that couldn't find their focus, looking at Maren the way people looked at something they weren't certain was real. What's your name? The young woman's lips moved. No sound came out. Maren bent lower, rain dripping from her cheek. Say it again. I can hear you. Rosalie. The name came out as thin as a thread. All right, Rosalie. I'm Maren. You fell, but you're still breathing, and I'm not going anywhere. Rosalie didn't answer. Her right hand began to move against the wet metal, her fingers groping blindly, opening and closing, searching for something to hold on to with the oldest instinct human beings possessed, an instinct that had existed before language itself. Maren looked at that hand for exactly half a second. Then she lifted one hand away from Rosalie's head and lowered it, and those ice-cold fingers closed around hers at once, gripping so tightly that it hurt. Maren didn't pull away. She counted Rosalie's breaths. She counted her pulse. She counted the seconds passing too. Not because anyone had told her to, but because counting was the only thing left when there was nothing more a person could do. On the 3rd floor, the stairwell door was still tapping softly against its steel frame. There were no footsteps. No one came down. 3 minutes and 50 seconds after the call began, Maren heard engines starting at both ends of the parking lot at the same time. 3 black vehicles entered the parking lot from opposite directions. 2 from the southern ramp, and 1 through the northern exit gate. And the first thing Maren noticed was that there were no sirens, no flashing lights, no shriek of brakes. They came in as though they had entered this place 100 times before. The doors opened almost simultaneously. None of the people who stepped out ran. That detail chilled the back of Maren's neck more than the rain itself, because in 4 years in the emergency department, she had learned that when people ran, it meant they had never done this before. And when they didn't run, it meant they had done it often enough to know that running wouldn't help. 1 man carrying a medical case walked straight toward the roof of the car. 2 others split apart, one heading toward the foot of the stairwell, the other lifting his gaze to scan the floors above. No one said a word to her. Then the rear door of the middle vehicle opened, and a man stepped out, and Maren knew he was the voice from the phone before he had a chance to speak. He wasn't carrying an umbrella. He crossed the parking lot with the pace of a man who had learned long ago that speed and panic were 2 entirely different things. He went straight to the car, and his eyes found Rosalie first. They stopped there. Maren was holding Rosalie's head, so she could look directly up at him, and she saw what happened across his face. The moment when everything inside a man closed itself away, 1 door at a time, not to hide his emotion, but to keep it from spilling out while there was still work to be done. "She's my sister," he said. He wasn't speaking to Maren. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He simply said it aloud, as though some truths had to be heard in a person's own voice before they could be believed. Then he turned to the man carrying the medical case and said 1 word. "Do it." The other man knelt on the opposite side of the car roof. "What do you see?" he asked Maren. She gave her report. She didn't tell a story, didn't apologize, didn't begin with the things people usually said when they were afraid. Fell approximately 7 minutes ago. Landed on metal, not concrete. The car roof absorbed some of the impact. Conscious intermittently. Able to state her name. Respirations 28. Shallow, with a tendency to catch at the end of inhalation. Pulse, 110. Regular. Pupils equal and reactive. Closed deformity of the left arm, no exposed bone. Pain in the left side of the chest with breathing. Suspected rib fractures. No significant bleeding anywhere. But that's what concerns me most. Because what can't be seen is often the most dangerous. I stabilized her neck from the first second, and I haven't let go once. The man with the medical case glanced up at her very quickly. Elias didn't look at her immediately. He looked at her 2 hands, at the 10 fingers cradling either side of his sister's head, and at the wet sleeves clinging to her arms. Then he looked down at the coat covering Rosalie's chest, a coat that wasn't hers. Only then did he look at Marin's face. "Where do you work?" he asked. "I already told you. Tell me again." "St. Brennan, Emergency Department. 4 years. He gave a single nod. Nothing more. But Marin worked in a place where people had to be read within 3 seconds to know who was lying about their pain, and she understood that nod. It wasn't courtesy. It was something being placed in its proper position inside his mind. His doctor worked quickly and in silence, fitting a cervical collar into the exact place where Marin's hands had been holding Rosalie still, and for the first time in nearly 8 minutes, she was able to pull her hands away. Her fingers had stiffened and ached, and they wouldn't straighten immediately. Rosalie's right hand was still holding hers. Marin had to bend down and whisper, "I'm still here. Let go just a little so they can move you." Rosalie released her. 2 men brought over a stretcher. Elias stayed close beside it, and when they lifted Rosalie, she cried out once, only once, the sound brief and broken. He placed a hand on her shoulder, touching her so lightly that he was almost not touching her at all, in the way of someone who understood that pressing down would hurt, but that having nothing there would be worse. "I'm here," he said. Rosalie couldn't open her eyes anymore, but her fingers found the edge of his sleeve and held on. Marin remained alone beside her car, with the long crack across the windshield, soaked from the shoulders down, her hands trembling from exhaustion or cold or both. Someone picked up her coat from where it had slipped during the transfer and handed it back to her without saying anything. Elias turned around. "You're cold," he said. "I'm fine. You're shaking. I'm angry." They looked the same. Something moved faintly at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but close enough to be dangerous. He took off his coat. Marin looked at it and didn't reach for it. "I don't need that." "I know," he said, and draped it over her shoulders before she could object. It was heavy, it was warm, and it smelled of cedar and something else she couldn't name. She hated that it worked. At the far end of the parking lot, the man who had gone toward the stairwell had returned and was speaking to someone else in a lowered voice. Elias listened. Then he turned back to her. "I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. Somewhere else. Come." Marin pulled the collar of his coat tighter around herself. Despite every warning, her reason was screaming at her. "I'm not one of your people." "No," he said. "That's why I said come, not follow me." Marin got into the car. She didn't think much about it until the door had closed and the parking lot was already falling away behind them, and by then, thinking about it was no longer useful. The vehicle carrying his sister went ahead. Theirs followed. No one used a siren, no one ran a red light, and Marin realized that moving slowly could also be a way of showing that you had no need to hurry. She sat wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers and tried not to count the turns. They didn't go to St. Brennan. They didn't go to any hospital she knew by name. The place where they stopped was a low building on the west side of the harbor, with no sign facing the street, only a small word in brass mounted beside a side entrance, Cedar Line. And what sent a chill down Marin's spine for the second time that evening wasn't the building. It was the fact that the side door opened before the vehicles had even come to a complete stop. No one rang a bell. No one called ahead from inside the car. She had been sitting right there, and she would have heard it. Yet while the wheels were still turning, 2 people were already waiting on the steps with a stretcher, and a third person was holding the door open. Rosalie's stretcher was inside within 40 seconds. In the corridor, people moved aside before Elias reached them. It wasn't the way employees stepped aside to make room for a patient. It was the way people moved when they knew very clearly that they shouldn't stand in his path. A doctor came toward them from the far end of the hallway, still fastening his coat, and he didn't say hello or ask what had happened. He said, "Mr. Corvino," and Marin heard everything in those 3 words. The tone of a man past 50, speaking to a man nearly 20 years younger, in the voice of someone who knew very well that he shouldn't keep him waiting. No one introduced him to her. No one needed to. Marin remained in the corridor as the door at the end of the hall closed, and she understood where she had stepped into that night, not because anyone told her, but because she watched how everyone else behaved. She sat down in the chair beside the wall because her legs had quietly begun arguing that they deserved to sit. Elias's coat was still around her shoulders. She had meant to return it 3 times, and 3 times something else had interrupted. Elias didn't sit. He stood facing that door, his arms hanging at his sides, perfectly still, in the way only fathers and brothers stood when some part of them needed desperately to do something, and there was nothing to be done. 40 minutes later, the door opened. The doctor came out, pulled down his mask, and went straight to the point, speaking in the manner of a man who knew exactly whom he was reporting to. Closed fracture of the left arm, clean break, minimal displacement. It will be cast. 2 fractured ribs on the left side, grade 2 concussion, and a small pneumothorax. Not enough to require a chest tube at present, but it must be monitored every hour for the first 48 hours. Spine is clear. No internal abdominal bleeding. No intracranial hematoma on the initial scan. Elias asked only one question. "She'll live." "She'll live," the doctor said. Then he turned toward Marin, and it was the first time anyone in that building had looked directly into her eyes. "You were the one at the scene." "Yes. You kept her neck immobilized the entire time, from the beginning until your doctor placed the collar." He nodded slowly. "I'm going to say this plainly," he said, and he spoke to Elias rather than to her, though he kept looking at her. With the pneumothorax and 2 broken ribs, had some well-meaning person at the scene pulled her upright, or carried her off the roof of the car to get her out of the rain, or simply rolled her onto her side, we would be telling a different story tonight. He paused. It wouldn't be an easier story to hear. The corridor fell silent. Elias didn't turn his head, but Marin saw his shoulders shift, barely, exactly once. "And the second thing," the doctor continued, "grade 2 concussion. She'll wake up, she'll be able to speak, and she may speak a great deal. But over the next 2 days, what she tells you may be fragmented, out of sequence, with later events remembered before earlier ones, or even memories of things that never happened. That is normal for the brain after trauma. I'm telling you now so none of you rush to believe anything she says during the first 48 hours. And don't rush to disbelieve her either." Elias said very quietly, "I understand." But Marin, sitting in the chair with both hands still unable to straighten completely, watched the doctor disappear down the hallway and thought something she didn't say aloud, that what he had just given them wasn't a medical warning. In this building, it had already become something else entirely. The man with silver at both temples entered from the far end of the corridor at nearly 9 o'clock that evening, and Marin knew at once that he didn't work there, because he walked straight to Elias without looking at anyone else along the way. He was somewhere between 55 and 60, broad-shouldered in the way of a man who had once done work that depended on the strength of his shoulders, and he spoke at half volume. Marin was sitting about 13 feet away. She heard more than they thought she could, because 4 years behind an intake desk had taught her how to listen to conversations people had never intended her to hear. "Gus," Elias called him. "What about the cameras? They didn't malfunction," Gus said. Elias said nothing. "They didn't malfunction," Gus repeated, as though he too needed to hear the words one more time. "I already sent someone into the conservatory's technical room. The server is still running, the hard drives are still full, and there was no failure of any kind. The camera cluster on the 3rd floor and the entire eastern stairwell were placed in suspended recording mode. There was a schedule, an authorization code, and an approval, completely legitimate on paper." He paused. "A maintenance window. 51 minutes. Elias asked, "What time did it begin?" 6:10. Rosalie fell at 6:40. There was the hum of the air conditioning in the corridor, the sound of cartwheels somewhere near the far end, and the rain outside gradually weakening. Even so, Marin felt as though every sound had suddenly gone out. The silence that followed wasn't an absence of noise. It was the presence of something very cold that had just entered the corridor and taken a seat among them. She had heard this silence once before, 3 years earlier, in a small room with 2 police officers and a plastic table, when they told her that none of the cameras along that stretch of road had been working. 30 minutes, Elias said. 30 minutes before she reached that place. Gus nodded, and they had another 21 minutes afterward to get out. Every one of them had enough time. Elias's expression didn't change. He stood there facing the door to his sister's room, and the only thing Marin saw move was his right hand. His fingers closed, then opened exactly once, and then became still again. Then he said something she didn't understand at the time. My father was shot in a restaurant on Eastern Street when I was 22, but he didn't die there. He died 2 hours later on a stretcher in the corridor of a public hospital. And during those 2 hours, 7 people walked past his bed. He said it in the same voice he had used to ask about the cameras. It didn't rise. It didn't fall. Then he turned away in the middle of the silence that followed, waiting for no answer, looking at no one, and began walking toward the end of the corridor. Maren watched his back and thought about 9 o'clock at night, about her car sitting in the parking lot with a long crack across the windshield, about her shift beginning at 7 the next morning, and about how the wisest thing to do now would be to stand, take off the coat, leave it on the chair, call a car, go home, and never mention this evening to anyone. She knew exactly what the wise choice was. She had known the wise choice for all 28 years of her life, and had never once followed it. "Who approved that maintenance window?" she called after him. Her voice carried through the empty corridor more loudly than she had intended. Gus turned to look at her for the first time since entering, with the expression of a man who had only just discovered that another person was in the room. Elias stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. He stood there for 3 seconds, giving Maren enough time to regret speaking, and then he looked back. "Say that again," he said. "That maintenance window didn't create itself. We have similar systems at the hospital. Every system does. To suspend recording in one area, someone has to create the schedule, and someone else has to approve it, and every system keeps the name of the person who gave that approval, because no one would dare sign off on anything otherwise." She paused. "So the question isn't whether the cameras malfunctioned. The question is who signed their name there, and whether that person knew what they were authorizing." Elias looked at her for a long time. It wasn't the look of a man assessing her. It was the look of someone rearranging something he had just realized he had placed in the wrong position. "Gus," he said, keeping his eyes on Maren, "do we have the approver's name?" "Yes," Gus said. "We do." "Then get it." Elias took 2 steps toward her. "How long did you work at the intake desk before moving to the emergency department?" 2 years. He nodded slowly. "That was the right question," he said. "For the past 2 hours, I've been asking whether the cameras failed, when they failed, and who deleted the files. Every question was about the machine. You're the first person who asked about the human being." Maren didn't know how to answer, so she told him the truth. "I work in a profession where half the job is figuring out which part of a patient's story is true. People rarely lie about the wound. They lie about where the wound came from." Something shifted very faintly in Elias's face, and this time Maren couldn't read it. "What's your name?" he asked. Down the corridor, the door at the far end opened a few inches, and a nurse stepped out, looked around, then said that the young woman inside had just opened her eyes and was calling for someone. Elias walked past her toward the room, then stopped at the threshold. "Come in," he said. Maren was about to say that this wasn't her concern. Then she remembered the hand that had gripped hers hard enough to hurt on the roof of the car, and she went inside. Rosalie looked much smaller than she had on the car roof, something that shouldn't have been possible, and yet somehow was. Her left arm had been cast and rested across her abdomen. The rain and blood had been cleaned from her face, so every bruise now showed itself fully and honestly. Her eyes searched for her brother first. "Elias, I'm here." He sat on the edge of the bed and placed his hand over her uninjured one, carefully, in the manner of someone who had learned the wrong kind of caution through years of trying to protect things he had never been able to protect. Then Rosalie's gaze drifted past his shoulder and settled on Maren near the door. "You were on the car," she said. "That's right. You held my hand." "I did." Rosalie blinked slowly, as though even blinking required consideration. "You're still here?" Elias asked whether she remembered anything. And from that moment, everything began to break apart. "It was raining," Rosalie said. "The rain went down the back of my collar. I remember that. Was I wearing a raincoat? I don't think I was." Then silence. Then, room 7 had been repainted. The whole floor smelled like paint. I hate that smell, so I didn't practice in room 7. I went down to room 3, but to get to room 3, you have to use the back way. Elias asked what time it was. Rosalie looked at the ceiling. "I don't know. Morning. No, evening. It was already dark, wasn't it?" Elias asked what she had heard. "There was water running," she said. "Someone said your name?" He leaned closer. "Who? I don't know. But it wasn't the way people say your name at school. At school, they say your name, because I'm your sister. This was different. It was the way people say someone's name when they're planning something about that person. Elias asked how many people there had been. Rosalie opened her mouth, then closed it. 2. Maybe 3. One of them didn't say anything. Elias asked where they had been standing, where she had been standing, whether she had seen anyone's face, pressing one question after another, and Maren saw what was happening before Rosalie could answer the third one. Her eyes began darting back and forth. Her uninjured hand tightened around the edge of the blanket. Her breathing, already shallow because of the 2 broken ribs, grew shorter still. She began speaking faster and with less order, talking about the door, then returning to the smell of paint, then saying she had dropped her rosin case, then saying no, she hadn't brought the rosin case with her. It was inside her instrument bag, and the instrument bag had been left in room 3. Had he brought her instrument bag home yet? Elias said the bag wasn't important. It is important, Rosalie said, and her voice broke in the middle of the word. On the back of his left hand, she said suddenly. The entire room stopped. What was on the back of his left hand? Elias asked very quietly. A tattoo. An anchor. There was a chain wrapped around it. I saw it because that hand was resting on the stair rail right where I was holding on, only about a handspan away from mine. I remember that more clearly than I remember the face. I didn't look at the face. I'm sorry. I didn't look at the face. It's all right, Elias said. You looked at what mattered. Then Rosalie fell silent. She stayed silent so long that Maren thought she had drifted off. Then she spoke without looking at anyone, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling, in the flat voice of someone reciting something that had been written into a place too deep to reach. Tell your brother Halloran sends his regards. No one in the room moved. Maren didn't know what the name meant, but she looked at Gus standing in the doorway and saw him straighten very slowly. And she looked at Elias and saw that his face didn't change at all, and that told her more than any expression could have. Elias asked whether she was certain those were the words. Rosalie nodded. Then she shook her head. Then she said, I'm sure about Halloran. I'm not sure about the order of the other words. Elias kept questioning her, his voice still even. But the questions began coming faster, and Rosalie began repeating herself. She told the story about the door for the 3rd time, described the smell of paint for the 4th, and Maren watched the heart rate on the monitor climb one step at a time. 112, 115, 118. She stepped forward. Mr. Corvino. He didn't hear her. Elias, she said. He turned around. That's enough, she said. There were 4 people in the room, and 3 of them looked at her as though she had just done something no one did in this place. She didn't take it back. Her brain was concussed 4 hours ago, she said. The harder you press her, the more her mind will invent details to fill the empty spaces, and she'll believe those inventions. And by tomorrow, you won't be able to tell which parts are real anymore. If you want something you can actually use, you have to let her rest. Elias looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned back, and he did the one thing Maren hadn't expected. He became silent. Rosalie breathed out. Her heart rate fell to 110, then 108. She closed her eyes. For 2 minutes, no one said anything, and Maren thought it was over. Then Rosalie opened her eyes again. She didn't look at her brother. She stared at the ceiling, and her voice was so quiet that everyone in the room had to lean closer. Elias. He bent down, the man with the tattoo. She stopped. I've seen him at our house before. No one in that room spoke for a very long time. Elias rose from the edge of the bed, and Maren knew exactly what he was about to do before he opened his mouth, because she had seen that movement in hundreds of patients' relatives. The movement of someone about to ask a question they couldn't bear to leave unasked for another second. What do you mean by our house? He said. Rosalie, look at me. Which house do you mean? The one in Fells Point or the old place? What year was it? Which door did that person come through? Don't, Maren said. She spoke softly, but she spoke at once, stepping between him and the hospital bed, not to block him, but to make him look at her instead of his sister. You're going to lose it, she said. Elias looked at her. For 3 years in the emergency department, she said. I've sat with people who had just suffered head injuries several times every week, and I'm telling you what will happen if you question her that way. Her brain right now is like a stack of papers that has just been thrown into the air. Every page is still there, but the order is gone. Ask her something broad like what happened. and she'll pick up whichever pages are closest and piece them together into something that feels complete. Because the human brain can't tolerate an empty space. It always fills it. Then she'll remember the version she assembled, instead of what actually happened, and you'll never be able to separate the two again. From the doorway, Gus asked one very brief question. Then how do we do it? Let me, Marin said. She sat in the chair beside the bed, not on the edge of the mattress, and pulled it back about 1.5 feet so Rosalie wouldn't have to look up at her. She didn't ask about the man with the tattoo. She didn't ask about the name Halloran. She asked, "What were you holding in your hands tonight?" Rosalie blinked. What? When you were walking from room 7 down to room 3, what were you holding? Rosalie was quiet for a moment. My phone, she said. Which hand? My right. What was in your left hand? Nothing. My left hand was holding the strap of my instrument bag on my shoulder. Is your instrument heavy? Yes. So did you take the stairs or the elevator? The elevator, Rosalie answered immediately. Then she stopped. No. The elevator was under maintenance. There was tape across the doors. I had to walk. Marin showed no reaction, though something inside her mind had just made a sharp sound. She continued. Were you going up or down? Down. Room 3 is on the ground floor. Then why did you go up to the 3rd floor? Rosalie opened her mouth, then closed it, and something changed in her eyes. It wasn't the panicked look from before. It was the look of someone who had just found one page lying exactly where it belonged. I was running away, she said. What did you hear before the footsteps? Marin asked. A door. Which door? The door to room 3. I had just set down my instrument bag when I heard it open, and I had just closed it. I turned around, and the hallway was dark. Were the hallway lights off? They had already been off. I thought it was because of the energy-saving schedule. Then what happened? Then I heard 2 people talking around the corner, and I heard my brother's name, and I didn't dare use the main entrance because I would have had to pass right by them. So I went the other way and ran upstairs. The eastern stairwell, Marin said. Rosalie nodded. It leads to the parking structure, 3 floors up. I was going to reach the 3rd floor and use the sky bridge into the building next door. There's a way through. No one knows about it. We use it when we want to leave early without anyone seeing us. Marin asked very slowly. What do you mean no one knows about it? It means it isn't on the school maps, Rosalie said. The skybridge door was locked years ago, but the latch was broken. If you pushed hard enough, it opened. Only a few of us knew. And tonight, Marin said, what was the door like? Rosalie looked directly at her, and for the first time that entire evening, her eyes were completely clear. It was locked. A new lock. A chain. I pushed twice. 30 minutes after Marin sat down in that chair, the sequence was back in its proper order. From the smell of paint in room 7 to the tattooed hand resting on the stair rail, and not one sentence in it had been invented by Rosalie to fill an empty space. Rosalie fell asleep before she could finish the final sentence. In the corridor, Elias stood facing Marin, and for a while he said nothing. You gave me what 4 of my people couldn't get in 2 hours, he said. Did you hear the important part? Marin asked. The skybridge door. No, she said. That was only the result. The important part was that the elevator was under maintenance. The hallway lights were off. The cameras had stopped recording, and the skybridge door had been fitted with a new lock. All 4 of those things fell under the authority of the same kind of person, and every one of them happened before your sister reached that place. That means no one was chasing her. Someone had already built a funnel and was simply waiting for her to enter it. Elias said nothing. But your sister just said that the skybridge route was a secret, Marin continued. Only a few students at the school knew about it. Someone had to reveal it before anyone else could know to lock that door. You could replace every camera in this city and still never find that, because secrets don't travel through machines. Secrets travel only through people. Outside the corridor, the rain had stopped completely. What's your name? Elias asked. She realized that he had asked her the same question once before, 2 hours earlier, and had been interrupted. Marin Whitlock. He repeated it once, very quietly, not because he needed to hear it more clearly, but in the way people repeated something they intended to remember. Elias's people drove her home, and they knew her address, even though she had never told them, and Marin decided she wasn't going to ask about that tonight. She climbed 4 flights of stairs because the elevator in her building was broken too, and she thought about how, in a single evening, She had heard the word maintenance more times than she had in the entire past year. She opened the door. The apartment looked exactly as it had when she left 14 hours earlier. The half-washed cup in the sink, the kitchen clock running 4 minutes fast, because she had never bothered to correct it. She took off Elias's coat and draped it over the back of a chair. It lay there, dark, expensive, belonging nowhere in that room, and she stood looking at it longer than necessary. Then she took a hot shower until her shoulders stopped trembling, and she lay down, and she couldn't sleep. An hour later, she sat up and went looking for the sleeping pills one of the doctors in her department had prescribed at the beginning of the year. Pills she had taken only 3 times. They were in the drawer of the small table beside her bed. She pulled it open, and the thing lying on top wasn't the packet of medication. It was an envelope from St. Brennan Hospital, stamped with the current month, which she had received 4 days earlier, and still hadn't opened. She opened it now, because at 2 in the morning, people often did the things they avoided in daylight. The amount was still there in the lower right corner, printed more boldly than every other number on the page, $41,200. Above it was the patient's name, Wesley Whitlock. Beside it was the date of admission, 3 years earlier, and the discharge date column was blank, because the hospital system had no box for people who never left. She had paid $11,000 over 3 years. With interest, the original balance had barely moved. Maren sat on the edge of the bed with the paper across her lap and thought about how, that very evening, she had stood in a corridor with air purifiers and leather-upholstered chairs, where a 20-year-old woman had been scanned within 15 minutes, and no one had handed anyone a piece of paper. She didn't feel bitter. She had exhausted bitterness a long time ago. She only felt tired in the way sleep couldn't cure. She folded the paper, returned it to the envelope, and placed it back in the drawer. Then she looked beneath the bed for exactly 1 second. Then she closed the drawer and turned off the light. At 2 in the morning, her phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. She picked it up and knew who it was before she answered. "You're still awake," he said. "You knew that before you called," I guessed. There was a faint sound on the other end, perhaps a door closing. "She asked whether you were all right," he said, twice before she fell asleep. The second time, she could barely make a sound, and she still asked. Maren sat up and leaned against the wall. Outside the window, a taxi moved slowly along the still wet street. "Tell her I'm fine. Tell her not to ask again." "I already did." She didn't believe me. "She said that on the car, you were so cold your teeth were knocking together." Maren didn't answer. She noticed that his voice was different tonight. It hadn't softened. It simply carried less armor, as though at 2 in the morning, even men like him had to remove 1 layer of something just to breathe. "You said something to me in the corridor," he said. "That secrets travel only through people. I've been sitting with that for 2 hours. Is it true?" "It's true, and it means someone on my list sold her out." "What list?" "The list of people I personally chose to stand between my sister and the rest of my life." He was silent for a while. "It took me 12 years to build that list, and tonight you showed me there's a hole in it." "I didn't show you anything," Maren said. "I only asked a question." "That's where I'm broken," he said. "I don't ask. I decide. My mother used to tell me that the only way I knew how to protect people was by building more walls, making them higher, making them thicker. And she said that one day, the thing I was protecting would suffocate inside them instead of dying because of someone outside." Maren looked at the coat draped over the chair in the darkness. "Was she wrong?" she asked. "Half wrong," he answered. Then the silence lasted so long that she thought the call had disconnected. "She died before I could find out which half." Maren had no answer for that, so she gave him the only thing she had. "Me too," she said. "There's someone I never got to finish asking either." He didn't ask anything more. She noticed, and she was grateful for it. "Go to sleep, Maren Whitlock," he said. "You stood in the rain longer than you needed to tonight." He ended the call. She lay down with the phone resting on her chest and stared at the stain on the ceiling that she had never cared enough to name. She finally fell asleep close to 4 in the morning. At 7, she had to be at the department. At 6:20 in the morning, Maren went downstairs, and her car was sitting where it always sat, about 100 feet from the entrance to her building. But its front end was facing outward, something she was certain she hadn't done the night before. The windshield was new. It hadn't been repaired or patched. It had been replaced entirely, so clean that in the gray morning light, She had to raise a hand and touch it before she could believe there was glass there at all. The roof had been hammered flat. Not a single dent remained. There was nothing inside the car. No letter. No business card. No one standing nearby waiting to be seen. Maren stood beside her car longer than necessary. And what unsettled her wasn't what they had done, but the fact that they had finished it in 9 hours. 6 of them during the night. In a city where every auto repair shop closed at 6 in the evening. She got into the car and drove to work, and she didn't call anyone to say thank you, because she hadn't yet decided whether she wanted to. The shift that day was long in exactly the way every Monday shift was long. An 82-year-old man who had fallen in the bathroom. A young man with cooking oil burns along his forearm. A woman who came in with chest pain that turned out to be panic, because her husband had just lost his job and she hadn't dared tell anyone. Maren worked and didn't think about the night before, or believed she wasn't thinking about it, until 3 in the afternoon, when she crossed the main lobby to take some files down to the front desk and saw him. Elias was standing near the row of waiting chairs, not sitting, his hands empty, in the exact posture of a man deciding whether he should sit down or remain standing so he could leave more easily. He was wearing a different coat from the one he had worn the night before. In that lobby filled with exhausted people, he didn't stand out because of his clothes. He stood out because he was the only person in the room who didn't look as though he were waiting for something. Maren carried the files the rest of the way down the corridor, handed them to her colleague at the desk, signed where she needed to sign, and only then walked over to him. "You could have called," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Then why didn't you?" Some things have to be said in person. Around them came the sound of a printer, the overhead speaker calling someone to room 4, and a small child giggling with her mother across the waiting area. "How is Rosalie?" she asked. "Irritable," he said. This morning she argued with the doctor about which part of her arm the cast was covering. At noon she demanded to go home. This afternoon she said that if they wouldn't let her leave, then at least someone should speak to her like a normal person, because everyone in that building was using the voice they reserved for someone who might shatter. Something moved faintly at the corner of his mouth as he said it. "Then she's recovering," Maren said. "That's how I know," he replied. Then he paused for a beat. "She wants to see you. She asked me to ask." Maren didn't answer immediately. She thought of the paper in the drawer, the stain on the ceiling, and how the wisest thing now would be to say thank you. "But I've already done my part." "Why you?" she said. He looked at her. "How many people do you have?" she continued. "I counted at least 8 last night. Any one of them could have come here and said exactly what you just said. You didn't need to stand in this lobby for 40 minutes waiting for me to walk past." Elias didn't ask how she knew it had been 40 minutes. He didn't say anything at all. He simply looked at her long enough for the question to become something else, and then he asked, "What time do you finish work?" Maren was about to remind him that wasn't an answer. Then she realized she already had one. 7 o'clock, she said. "I'll send a car. I have a car. New windshield," she said. "I know," he answered. 3 days later, Rosalie was allowed to go home, and Maren drove her own car there on Thursday evening. The house stood in Fells Point, narrow across the front, and built of old brick, pressed close between rows of nearly identical houses on either side, with the water visible at the end of the street. There was no nameplate. Nothing outside suggested who lived there, except for one detail Maren noticed, because she had learned how to notice such things over the past 4 days. The man sitting in the car parked diagonally across the street wasn't reading anything, wasn't using his phone, and had looked up at her while she was still about 100 feet away. Rosalie opened the door. She did it with her right hand, while her casted left arm rested in a sling around her neck, and she announced from the threshold that she had argued with everyone in the house until they finally let her answer the door herself. She was still bruised and still guarded one side of her ribs when she walked, but her eyes had returned completely to where they belonged. The living room opened into the kitchen, with a long wooden table where only 3 chairs had been pulled out, and in the corner, near the window overlooking the street, a cello stood upright on its stand. Maren noticed something within the first 30 seconds, though she didn't yet understand why she had noticed it. Rosalie didn't look toward that corner even once. She walked around the table instead of taking the shorter, straighter path. She turned her chair so her back faced the window. For 20 minutes, she talked about the doctor, about how badly the cast itched, and about a classmate who had called her 11 times in 2 days, though she hadn't called back because she still hadn't decided what she was going to tell her. She didn't mention the cello once. No one else in the house mentioned it either. Maren left the matter alone. She asked whether Rosalie had been sleeping well. "Yes," Rosalie said, then immediately added, "Not exactly. I keep waking up near dawn. It isn't because I'm afraid. It's because I remember something else, and then I lie there trying to decide whether it really happened. Can you tell me how to know the difference?" Marin told her that when a memory returned with a smell, or with a sensation against the skin, it was often real. But when a memory fit too perfectly, when it slipped too neatly into an empty space, she needed to be careful. Rosalie considered that with the seriousness of someone working through an assignment. Then she asked, "Have you been doing this a long time?" 4 years in the emergency department, and 2 years at the intake desk before that. "Do you like it?" "No one has ever asked me that," Marin said. Rosalie shrugged with her uninjured shoulder. "People usually ask whether you're tired." "That's different." Then her tone changed as naturally as turning over a hand. "My brother came to the hospital himself to find you, didn't he?" Marin said he had. Rosalie nodded thoughtfully. "You know he never does that, don't you? He sends people to do everything. Someone buys things for him. Someone attends meetings in his place. Someone tells other people the things he doesn't want to say himself. I can't remember the last time he went somewhere personally to do anything, but when it came to you, he went himself." Marin was about to say that it was only because the situation was important. Then she realized that if it was important, that would have given him even more reason to send someone else. She said nothing. Rosalie watched her with satisfaction and didn't add another word, because she was intelligent enough to know when she had finished planting something. Elias came home at nearly 8 o'clock. He hung his coat on the hook beside the door, saw Marin sitting at the table, and for one very brief moment, something passed across his face before being cleared away at once. He hadn't expected her to still be there. Marin noted it and put it aside. "She's staying for dinner," Rosalie said in the voice of someone announcing a matter that had already been settled. "I can see that," Elias said. A housekeeper served dinner, and the three of them took their seats, and Marin noticed that Elias said almost nothing throughout the meal. Rosalie talked about her harmony instructor, the classmate who had called 11 times, and a movie she had watched twice during the 3 days she had been confined to the house. Her brother responded perhaps 4 times, each response no more than a short sentence. But halfway through the meal, Marin understood something. In 4 years of listening to people speak in the emergency department, she had learned that most people, when they were silent, were merely waiting for their turn to talk. He wasn't like that. He was silent in the way of someone who placed the whole of his attention in the center of the room and left it there. When Rosalie talked about her friend, he didn't nod merely to appear engaged, but when she finished, he asked one precise question about how she intended to answer that friend, and the question revealed that he had heard every word. Marin thought, "This man listens more carefully than anyone I have ever met, and says less than all of them." Then she thought that those 2 things were probably not a coincidence. Near 9 o'clock, when Rosalie went upstairs because the medication was beginning to take effect, only the 2 of them remained in the room. Elias stood and cleared his sister's plate, and Marin noticed that he lowered it into the sink very gently, as though even the sound of dishes touching was something to be avoided. She rose to her feet. "I should go. I'll walk you out," he said. Gus called on Saturday afternoon, and Marin knew something was wrong before Elias said a single word, because the call came at 4 o'clock, while she was still on duty, at an hour when he had never called her before. "We found the person who approved it," he said. "Do you want to know?" "I finish work at 7. I'll wait." His name was Desmond Trask, 61 years old, the senior facilities supervisor at Ashvale Conservatory, where he had worked for 19 years. He was the only person at the school with the authority to approve both the practice room schedules and the maintenance schedules for the elevator, the corridor lighting, and the camera system. All 4 things Marin had counted off in the hospital corridor that night rested beneath a single signature. In the car on the way there, Gus told Elias that his men were already waiting at Trask's house and could have him at the harbor within 20 minutes. Marin heard the words, and she also heard the way Elias didn't object. "Let me speak to him first," she said. Both men in the car turned to look at her. "Why?" Elias asked. "Because you've already decided what you're going to do," Marin said. "I haven't." The car remained silent for nearly an entire block. Then Elias said, "All right." Desmond Trask's house stood on the east side of the city, a small, single-story home with cracked concrete steps and an old truck parked outside. He opened the door, saw the 3 people standing there, and didn't ask who they were. That was the first detail Marin noted. Innocent people asked questions. He simply stepped back and said, "Come in." The house smelled of antiseptic, and of a room someone had occupied for a long time, but no longer had the strength to keep clean. A stack of papers sat on the dining table beside an unopened box of syringes. He lowered himself into a chair and rested both hands on his thighs. "I knew you would come," he said. "I've been waiting for 4 days. Elias didn't sit. You approved that maintenance window. Yes. You turned off the lights in the ground floor corridor. Yes. You had the 3rd floor skybridge door locked. Yes." Not once did the man hesitate. Not once did he try to take back or change a single word. Marin had sat across from hundreds of people telling stories they wanted to hide, and she knew this voice. It belonged to someone who had spent 4 days preparing his answers inside his head, and had only been waiting for someone to arrive so he could finally say them aloud. "Did you know what was going to happen to the girl?" Elias asked. This time, Trask hesitated. "They told me they only wanted to take a few photographs," he said. "They said they needed to know which route she took, and what time she used it. That was all. They said no one would touch her." He looked up, and for the first time during the conversation, his eyes were wet. "I believed them because I needed to believe them. That was where I became a coward." Marin asked the next question before Elias could, and she asked because for the past 2 minutes she had been watching the box of syringes on the dining table. "How much did they pay you, Mr. Trask?" A sound escaped him that wasn't quite a laugh. "They didn't pay me anything," he said. He pulled the stack of papers toward himself, then pushed it across the table to her. They weren't utility bills. They came from a dialysis center, page after page arranged by month, with the top sheet bearing the name Junie Trask, 33 years old. Dialysis 3 times a week. "My daughter," he said. "End-stage kidney failure. She's been waiting for a transplant for 2 years. Her insurance expired when she left her job, and she left because she couldn't remain standing through an entire shift anymore." Marin picked up the top page and read the amount printed in the lower right corner, and something very cold traveled down her spine, because she knew exactly what it felt like to sit in front of a page like that at 2 o'clock in the morning. "I borrowed money," Trask said. "The bank wouldn't lend to me. I'm 61, and this house is already mortgaged, so I borrowed from the kind of people who lend." "Where?" Elias asked. "Down by the harbor. There's an office on Thames Street. They give cash loans and don't ask questions. I borrowed $40,000. I made payments for 11 months. Then, in the 12th month, someone came here. They didn't hit me. They simply sat with me in this kitchen for 2 hours and talked about Junie. They said her doctor's name. They said what time the car picked her up for dialysis. Then they told me I could erase the entire debt with one signature approving a schedule." Trask stopped. "I've spent 19 years at that school. I've known your sister since her first year. She's the only student in that entire place who greets me by name." He lowered his head. "I signed anyway." No one in the room said anything. Then Elias asked, in a voice that had changed, "What was the name of that office?" Trask gave him a name. Marin didn't know what the name meant, but she was looking directly at Elias when it was spoken, so she saw what happened. He didn't turn pale. He didn't step back. He simply became still, completely still, and she realized that this was the first time in the 6 days she had known him that she had seen him need a moment to understand something. Gus, standing by the door, said very quietly, "Boss." Elias didn't answer. He remained motionless for a long time. Long enough for Trask to lift his head and look at him. Long enough for Marin to glance toward Gus with a question in her eyes. And after 3 seconds, Gus told her in a lowered voice what no one had intended to say aloud that night. That operation was sold. It was sold 2 years ago to another group, but the corporate records still carry his name, because changing the name would mean reopening the file. And if the file were reopened, someone might read it. Marin let the words settle inside her mind before she understood them completely. The people tightening the rope around this old man's throat had never seen Elias's face. Elias had never known this old man existed, but the line connecting them had been there for 12 months, and it carried his name. Trask didn't understand what had just happened in his kitchen. He only saw 3 strangers remaining silent for too long. So he did what a 61-year-old father would do. He stood, let his hands fall at his sides, and spoke to Elias with a calm so complete that it was painful. "You can do whatever you want to me," he said. "I'm not begging. I signed, so I'll answer for it. But my daughter has nothing to do with this. She doesn't know a single word about any of it." He paused, then finished. You have a sister. You understand me. Elias looked at the old man for a long time. Then he said one word, softly, almost without sound. Sit down. Desmond Trask sat down. Elias pulled out the chair opposite him and sat as well. And Marin understood that she had just watched something turn in a different direction, because in the 6 days she had known him, this was the first time she had seen him sit at eye level with another person. How much do you still owe? He asked. Trask gave him the amount. Elias turned to Gus. Monday morning. Pay it all. The principal, the interest, and whatever they added on themselves. Get the final settlement papers, the originals, not copies. Gus didn't move. Boss, he said, and he said only one sentence. Your father wouldn't have done this. I know, Elias replied. Then he turned back to Trask and continued as though those words had never been spoken. Who is handling your daughter's dialysis? The center on Caroline Street, Trask said, his voice beginning to tremble because he still didn't understand what was happening to him. 3 sessions a week. Starting next week. Move her to Cedar Line, Elias said. She'll remain on the transplant waiting list, because that part can't be changed, but everything else is no longer your burden. Trask opened his mouth. No words came out. He sat there, 61 years old, both hands resting on his thighs, and Marin had to look away. I'm not finished, Elias said. You keep your job at the school. You continue going to work every morning. And when they contact you again, because they will, you answer them. You tell them what I instruct you to tell them. Trask looked up. You want me to lie to them? I want you to tell them exactly what I want them to believe, Elias said. You don't have to do anything else. You don't have to listen for anything, take anything, or question anyone. You only have to answer the phone the way you've answered it for the past 12 months. If your voice changes, they'll know immediately. So don't change it. Stay as frightened as you are now. Trask asked, Why aren't you taking me to the harbor? Elias stood. Because this week I learned that there are lines carrying my name that I have never seen, he said. You're one of them. On the way back to the car, Gus said nothing and Marin said nothing, and Elias walked between them as though he had just set down something immensely heavy and still didn't know where it belonged. Then the phone in his pocket vibrated. He looked at the screen, stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, and listened. The call lasted less than 20 seconds. He didn't say a single word. When he lowered the phone, Gus asked, Who was it? The other side, Elias said. What did they say? Doc 9. 7 days. They said I sign over the operating rights. Or else. Gus asked. What does or else mean? Elias looked out at the wet street. Their exact words were, Next time it won't be a fall. Marin stood 2 steps away and felt cold move along both arms, not because of the October wind, but because she had just heard a sentence designed to require no further explanation. No one spoke in the car during the entire drive back to Fells Point. Inside the house, the kitchen light was still on, and Rosalie sat at the table with 3 notebooks open in front of her. She looked up the moment the door opened. She didn't ask where they had been. She went directly to the matter she had spent the entire evening preparing. I'm going back to school on Monday. No, Elias said. You haven't heard me out. I don't need to. I have assignments for 3 classes due before the end of the month, and a midterm assessment that will cost me the entire semester if I miss it. I won't practice. I'll only attend theory classes, 2 hours a day, and one of your people can take me there and bring me home. He said no. Rosalie put down her pen, and her voice rose, and that was when Marin saw clearly what she had been sensing for the past several days. It wasn't that Rosalie wanted to return to class. She wanted to prove that she was still capable of returning. So how long are you planning to keep me locked inside this house? Rosalie said. When will it be safe enough for you? Give me a number. Elias gave her no number. He stood there without having removed his coat, and Marin saw his shoulders tighten, and she knew that if this continued for 3 more sentences, both of them would say things they would spend the next month trying to take back. She didn't argue. She walked around the table, gathered the 3 notebooks together, and spoke to Rosalie in the same voice she used in the department at 3 o'clock in the morning. I need you to show me where you keep the kettle. Rosalie looked at her, then at her brother, then stood and followed her into the back kitchen. Marin heated the water. She said nothing about what had just happened. She asked Rosalie about the midterm assessment, and Rosalie explained it, and as she spoke, her breathing settled again. 7 minutes later, when the kettle began to boil, Maren left her there with 2 cups and walked back out. Elias was still standing in the same place. She passed him to take her coat from the hook, stopped for exactly 1 second, and said exactly 1 sentence. "She's 20 years old." Then she walked toward the door. Behind her, in the back kitchen, water poured into a cup. Elias didn't answer, but by the time Maren reached the front steps, before the door had fully closed, she heard him walk into the kitchen and pull out a chair. Then she heard his sister begin again from the beginning, more slowly this time. And this time, someone sat and listened until she had finished. The false information was released on Monday. Elias instructed Trask to tell the other side that he would go to Dock 9 on Wednesday night to examine the books, traveling in a single car with only his driver. It was the kind of information no one could have guessed on their own, and that was the point. If the other side came to Dock 9 on Wednesday night, it would mean Trask had told Elias the truth. If they didn't come, that would mean something too, only something different. But Elias did one more thing he didn't tell Trask about, and it wasn't until much later that Maren understood why he had done it. He gave 3 different people 3 different versions of the same plan. To the first person, he said Dock 9 on Wednesday night. To the second, he said the cold storage warehouse on Boston Street on Tuesday night. To the third, the man who had driven for the family for 9 years. The man who had taken his mother to chemotherapy 14 times during the final year of her life. He said Warehouse 4 in Locust Point at 10 o'clock on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night, 4 men arrived at Warehouse 4 in Locust Point. Maren wasn't there. She learned what happened from Gus 3 days later, and he told her using exactly as many words as were necessary. They entered through the rear door. Elias's people had been inside since 7 o'clock that evening. There was a very brief span of time when everything happened at once. An iron door slammed shut, men shouted, a fist struck someone, and 2 people fell into a storage rack hard enough to bring the entire thing down. Gus stopped there, and Maren didn't ask him to continue. 3 of the 4 men belonged to Halloran. The 4th was the driver. He didn't run. That was the detail Elias repeated only once afterward. The man didn't run. He stood in the middle of the warehouse with both hands hanging at his sides, and when Elias approached him, he spoke before anyone asked him a question. 9 years, he said. I drove for your family for 9 years, and I'm still exactly where I started. Elias asked what he had been promised. A dock, the man said. Halloran told me that when this was over, Dock 7 would be put in my name. He said it with the expression of someone presenting a reason he already knew wasn't enough. Elias asked whether he had known about what happened at the conservatory. The driver remained silent. Elias asked again, more slowly. Did you know beforehand? I didn't know what they planned to do to the girl, he said. I only told them which routes the family used. I swear. Then he lifted his head and added one more sentence. And it was the sentence that made even Gus pause when he repeated it. She always sits in the back seat on the right. I know that habit too, but I didn't tell them that. Gus stopped the story there. It's finished, he told Maren. She asked what finished meant. It means he won't drive anyone again, Gus said, in the voice of a man closing a door. Maren didn't ask anything more. She understood that some questions were asked only to confirm what a person already knew, and she didn't want this confirmed. But she went to Fells Point on Wednesday evening because Rosalie sent her a message saying that her brother had been home since the night before and hadn't spoken a word to anyone. Maren found him sitting on the front steps. The weather had turned truly cold, late October, with wind blowing up the street from the water. He wasn't wearing a coat. He sat on the highest step, with his elbows resting on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, looking toward the end of the street where the water could be seen. Maren sat on the step below, leaving a little space between them, and for the first 3 minutes, she said nothing. Then he spoke. He drove my mother to the hospital 14 times. Maren didn't answer. During the last year of her life, I was busy. I was 24 years old, and I was trying to hold on to everything my father had left behind, and I thought that if I could keep it all together, everything would be all right. So I didn't take her. He did. He sat in the corridor and waited for her for 4 hours every time, and he bought her the kind of ginger candy she sucked on to ease the nausea, and I know that because she told me. He never said a word about it. Elias was silent for a while. 9 years, he said. He said he had spent 9 years and was still standing exactly where he began. Maren turned her head and looked at him from the side. Beneath the streetlight, she saw something she hadn't seen in him during the 10 days she had known him. He looked exactly 34 years old. no older. He didn't look like the man an entire hospital corridor moved aside to let pass. He was only a 34-year-old man sitting on the steps of his own home on an October night, trying to understand what he had failed to see for 9 years. "Are you going to answer him?" she asked. "Answer what?" the question he asked. Why, after 9 years, he was still in the same place. Elias didn't respond for a long time. Then he said, "He never asked me that question. Not once in 9 years. He asked Halloran. The wind moved through the space between them. Inside the house behind them, they heard Rosalie crossing the living room. Then her footsteps stopped, then continued, and Marin knew she had looked out through the window and decided to leave the two of them alone. "You should go inside," Marin said. "It's cold." "Yes," he said. But he didn't stand, and neither did she. He came to her apartment on Sunday evening, 3 days after the night they had sat on the front steps, and he came alone, with no car and no one waiting on the street below. Marin opened the door and found him standing in the hallway, and she knew at once that something was wrong, because in the 2 weeks she had known him, this was the first time he had gone anywhere without someone beside him. "May I come in?" he said. She stepped back. Her apartment was small, and his presence made it smaller. He didn't sit. He stood in the middle of the room and looked around exactly once, not with judgment, but like someone trying to match a detail he had read with the thing now standing in front of him. "I'll say what I came to say, and then I'll leave," he said. "You can throw me out at any moment." Marin folded her arms. "The first night, while you were sitting in the corridor at Cedar Line, I had someone investigate you." She became still. "Within 2 hours, I had your name, where you worked, how long you had worked there, where you lived, and how much money you owed, and to whom. I do that with everyone who comes within 10 feet of my sister. I'm not apologizing for doing it, because if I had that night to live over again, I would still do it." "All right," Marin said, her voice turning cold. "That's why your people knew my address even though I never told them." "Yes. So you came here to tell me something I figured out on the first day." "No," he said. He stood there, and during those 3 seconds, Marin saw a man being forced to do something for which he possessed no skill at all. "There was one line in that report," he said. "September, 3 years ago. Pratt Avenue. A driver struck someone and fled the scene. The victim was Wesley Whitlock, 19 years old, your younger brother. The vehicle and the driver were never found, and the case was closed after 7 months. The refrigerator was running in the room." Marin could hear it with perfect clarity. "You read my brother's case file," she said. "I read one line in your file," he said. "But I remember that night." She didn't move. "Keep talking." "That night, I received a call at nearly 2 o'clock in the morning," he said. "The man who called worked near the docks at the time. He wasn't one of mine, but he was close enough to think calling me was the right thing to do. He said a vehicle had just caused an incident on Pratt Avenue, and that the vehicle carried an access permit belonging to a freight company that operated at the docks. He asked whether I wanted to know who owned it." Marin stopped breathing. "I knew who owned that vehicle," he said. "It wasn't mine, and the driver wasn't one of my people, but it belonged to a company that was paying me for access to the docks at the time, and with a single phone call, I could have learned who had been driving that night." He paused. "I didn't make the call." "Why?" Marin said. Her voice was very quiet. "Because at the time, it wasn't my concern," he said. "Because if I asked, I would have to do something, and doing something would open 3 other matters I was trying to keep quiet. Because something happens to someone on these streets every week, and if I investigated every one of them, I wouldn't survive." He looked directly at her. "And because I didn't know the name of the person lying there, I chose not to ask his name. That is the part where I believe I was most cowardly, not the part where I failed to make the call." Marin could hear the blood moving inside her ears. She thought of a hospital corridor, of 40 minutes, of a hand slowly growing cold inside hers, of 2 police officers and a plastic table, and the words that none of the cameras along that stretch of road had been working. "You knew the name connected to that vehicle from the night it happened," she said. "I knew the name of the company. You can find the driver." "Yes." "How long would it take?" Elias didn't avoid the question. "1 day," he said, "possibly less." Marin nodded slowly. Then she asked the final question, and she asked it with complete calm, and it was that calm that made it frightening. "How long have you known about this?" 3 days, he said. 3 days. You sat at dinner with me in your house on Thursday night. Yes. You sat with me on the front steps and talked about your mother. Yes. Then why are you only telling me tonight? Elias didn't answer immediately. He stood there in the middle of the small room. And then he said the truest thing he had spoken during the 2 weeks she had known him. Because during those 3 days, I thought of 3 ways to avoid telling you, he said. The first was to remain silent, because you would never find out. The second was to find the man myself and bring him to you like a gift, so you would feel grateful to me instead of angry. The third was to pay the entire $41,200 on Monday morning and say nothing, so you would feel the weight lift without ever knowing why. He stopped. All 3 ways involved me deciding for you again. I did that to my sister for 12 years, and last week I finally saw where it led. So I came here to tell you. Now that you know, you decide. That was my only purpose in coming. Marin stood there for a very long time. Then she walked to the door and opened it. Get out, she said. He didn't argue. He walked toward the door. At the threshold, he stopped, but he didn't turn around. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I don't believe there is any room for that. Get out, she said again. He left. Marin closed the door, locked it, and stood with her back pressed against it until she could no longer hear his footsteps on the stairs. Then she slid down to the floor and sat there in the darkness, and for the first time in 3 years, she cried aloud. She remained on the floor until her legs went numb before she finally stood, and she didn't turn on the light, and she walked straight into the bedroom, knelt beside the bed, and pulled out the box. It was a brown cardboard file box with a lid, its 2 corners worn soft by human hands. It hadn't worn that way with time. It had worn that way because of her. People often imagined that there were boxes left beneath beds for 3 years because their owners couldn't bear to open them. This box wasn't like that. Marin had opened it dozens of times. She had opened it on nights when she couldn't sleep, on Sunday afternoons, on the first anniversary of Wesley's death, and on the night she received the hospital's first letter about the money she owed. She knew what was inside without having to look. She had taken it to the police station twice. The first time was 4 months after Wesley died, and a detective had listened to her for 15 minutes before telling her that what she had was circumstance, not evidence. The second time was 10 months later, after she had gone out on her own and asked questions in several more places, and that time another man met with her, one who didn't even open the box. He said exactly 4 words that she still remembered word for word. Not enough probable cause. She stopped after that, not because she believed them, because she had nothing left. She worked the night shift 6 nights a week. She paid the debt. She kept living. And she pushed the box farther beneath the bed. Not because she wanted to forget it, but because she no longer had the strength to carry it anywhere else. There was a kind of exhaustion no one knew how to name. It wasn't the same as sadness. It was simply the day when you realized you no longer had enough strength to fight for someone who was dead, and you hated yourself for it, and you stopped anyway. Tonight, she lifted the lid, and there was nothing new inside. A copy of the accident report, 2 photographs of the road in daylight that she had taken herself, a sheet of paper listing 3 businesses along Pratt Avenue where she had asked about security cameras, an envelope containing the things the hospital returned to her that night, his keys, his wallet, 1 shoelace, and Wesley's phone, broken, which she had kept. Then, at the very bottom, was the thing she had picked up dozens of times and set back down each time. His hard plastic employee identification card bearing his photograph. 19 years old, hair untidy, smiling from one side of his mouth in the way he always did when someone forced him to pose for a picture. The card said, night shift. It carried an employee number. And in small print at the lower corner, faded from hanging against the pocket of his pants every night, was the name of his workplace. Cold Storage Warehouse, Dock 9. Marin sat down on the floor with the card in her hand and read those 4 words. And this time they were no longer only 4 words. For 3 years, she had looked at that name dozens of times, and it had meant nothing to her, because it was only the place where her younger brother worked extra night shifts to help with the rent, 1 cold storage warehouse among dozens in the harbor district of a port city. She had told the detective about it. He had seen nothing in it either. But during the past 3 weeks, she had heard that name spoken 3 times in 3 different rooms, and the final time had been on the sidewalk outside Desmond Trask's house, when a man lowered his phone and said, Dock 9, 7 days. She placed the card on the floor and remained motionless for a long time. Then she took out her own phone, opened the conversation she had never deleted and had opened no more than 3 times in 3 years, and scrolled to the bottom. Wesley's final message to her had been sent at 12:47 in the morning. Marin, something strange is happening at the warehouse tonight. Some people who aren't on our shift came in through the cold storage entrance. I took a picture of this. Don't worry, I'll tell you when I get home. Beneath it was an image file that could no longer be loaded, only a gray square and the words "content expired." He had been struck at 1:20 in the morning, 33 minutes after sending that message. On Pratt Avenue, a mile and a half from the gate of Dock 9, along the exact road someone would take while walking home from the Harbor District. Marin had shown the message to the police the first time. She remembered exactly what the detective had said. He said Wesley worked the night shift at a warehouse, so seeing something strange there wasn't unusual. And the photograph was gone, and the road was dark, and the city had more than 200 hit-and-run incidents every year. Not one word of what he said had been wrong. 3 years ago, all she had was a 19-year-old boy sending his sister a message about people entering a warehouse during the wrong shift. Tonight, she had the name of that warehouse. She had the name of the man trying to take control of it. She had the date and time, and she had an employee card proving that her brother had been standing inside that building on that exact night. She sat on the bedroom floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, surrounded by the things no one had been willing to examine for 3 years, and for the first time in 3 years, they all settled into their proper places. She hadn't suddenly remembered something. The world had finally given her the missing name. She closed the lid, held the box against her chest, and remained that way until morning. She called out of her Monday shift, something she hadn't done once in 2 years, and drove away at 9 o'clock in the morning with the box secured in the passenger seat, its seatbelt fastened around it, something she would later find funny, and that felt entirely reasonable at the time. Her phone vibrated when she was still 4 blocks from where she was going. She knew who it was before she looked at the screen. She intended not to answer. Then she answered. "Rosalie says you haven't come by since Sunday," Elias said. "She's sent you 3 messages. I've read them. I haven't been able to answer." He said nothing for a while. Then he said, "I'm not calling to ask you for anything. I'm calling because Gus told me your car left the city at 9 o'clock and wasn't heading toward the hospital. You're still having someone follow me." "No," he said. "I've had someone watching over you since the night at Trask's house. There is a difference, and I don't expect you to see it right now." He paused. "Where are you going, Marin?" She looked up at the sign at the entrance, turned into the parking lot, shut off the engine, and sat motionless in the car with the phone pressed to her ear. In front of her stood a low building of concrete and glass, with a flagpole, a fence, and a brass plaque mounted on the gatepost that she had read 3 times on the way there. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Baltimore Field Office. "I'm in the parking lot of the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said. Then she continued, because once she had begun, she had to say all of it. "My brother worked the night shift at the cold storage warehouse at Dock 9. I have his employee identification card. I have the message he sent me at 12:47 in the morning on the night he died, saying that people who weren't on his shift had entered the warehouse. I took these things to the police twice in 3 years, and both times they sent me away. Now I know the name connected to that warehouse, and I'm taking everything inside." She heard him breathing on the other end of the line. "You know better than I do what will happen," she said. "If they reopen Dock 9, they won't open only half of it. They'll drag everything connected to that dock over the past 10 years into the light. You know what's in there." "I know," he said. "Then say it." Silence followed. Marin sat in the car and counted it, not because she wanted to, but because she counted breaths and pulses for a living, and couldn't stop herself. 1, 2, 3, 4. "All right," he said. She said nothing. "Do you need anything else from me?" he asked. "I don't need anything." "Then go," he said. "Don't let them keep the box without giving you a receipt. Ask for a receipt that lists every item individually." Then he ended the call. Inside, she waited for 40 minutes in a reception area with plastic chairs and a broken vending machine, and she told her story 3 times to 3 different people, each version shorter than the one before, and she began to think that for the 3rd time in her life, she would walk out of a government building carrying the same box, with nothing changed. Then a woman came out, around 45 years old, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and she handed one to Marin before sitting down. She introduced herself as Agent Ruiz. She didn't ask Marin to begin at the beginning. She asked exactly one question. Did you say Doc 9? Yes, Marin said. Ruiz set her coffee on the table without drinking from it. Stay here, she said, then stood and went outside, and Marin heard her say something in the corridor, and 6 minutes later, she returned with 2 other people and a file as thick as a hand. Miss Whitlock, Ruiz said, I'm about to tell you something I probably shouldn't, but I've been doing this work for 19 years, and sometimes a choice has to be made. She placed a hand on the file. We opened the Doc 9 investigation in April of the year before last, 18 months ago. We have the flow of money, the shipping schedules, and 3 witnesses on the inside, but all 3 of them were involved. So if they testify in court, the defense will tear their statements apart. We have everything except one thing. She looked at Marin. We know that on the night of September 17th, 3 years ago, an unscheduled shipment entered that cold storage warehouse. We have satellite images, phone records, and even the names of 3 people who were present. What we could never prove was that a 4th person was inside the warehouse that night, someone who didn't belong to either side, an independent witness. Without that person, it's only criminals accusing one another for their own benefit. With that person, the whole case can stand. Marin heard the blood moving in her ears for the 2nd time in 3 days. For 3 years, we've called that person the 4th witness, Ruiz said, and we never knew the name. She stopped. You're telling me you have a time card? Marin opened the box. She placed the plastic card on the table with the photograph facing upward. A 19-year-old boy with untidy hair smiling from one side of his mouth. Then she placed her phone beside it. Already open to the message sent at 12:47 in the morning. His name was Wesley, she said. He was my brother. No one in the room touched either item. Ruiz stared at them for a long time. Then she looked up, and Marin saw that her eyes had turned red, and she spoke in the voice of someone who had just set down something she had carried on her shoulders for 18 months. Can you stay here with me for the rest of the day? Elias arrived at Dock 9 on Wednesday afternoon, the 7th day of the 7 days, precisely at the deadline the other side had set. He came in 2 cars. He didn't bring more men than necessary, because today wasn't a day for counting men. Cormac Halloran was already there, standing inside the empty warehouse with 4 of his men and a folding table someone had just set up. On the table lay a stack of papers and a pen, and Halloran was the kind of man who brought a pen to a meeting so the other side would see it. He was past 50, half a head shorter than Elias, and he smiled when he saw him walk in. I thought you would send someone, Halloran said. I thought I should come myself today, Elias replied. Halloran pointed toward the papers. Sign them, then go home and have dinner with your sister. How is the girl doing? Elias didn't answer that question. He walked to the table, looked at the papers for exactly 2 seconds, then didn't touch them. I came to tell you a few things, he said. You don't have to believe me. Listen, then verify them yourself. Halloran folded his arms. The man you had at the conservatory, Elias said. The one with the anchor tattoo on the back of his left hand. I've known who he is since last week. I also know who arranged the maintenance schedule. But I didn't touch him, and that is the first thing you should find strange. Halloran shrugged. The second thing, Elias said. My driver. You promised him Dock 7. He doesn't drive for me anymore. Try calling him. Something very quick passed across Halloran's face. The third thing, Elias said. The 4 men you sent to Warehouse 4 in Locust Point last Tuesday night. 3 of them were yours. Do you know why they went to that exact place? Because I told them to. I gave 3 different people, 3 different locations, and I waited to see where you appeared. You showed me the exact hole inside my own house that I had spent 12 years trying to find. You did that for me. Halloran was no longer smiling. But none of those things is why I came here, Elias said. He paused. Wind moved through a gap in the warehouse door. You had your men drive my sister up to the 3rd floor, he said, and you had them lock the only door she believed she knew about, and no one else did. You weren't trying to kill her. You were trying to make me lose my mind. You wanted me angry before I had time to think, so I would come looking for you that same night. So I would do something large and stupid out in the street, and then you could sit back and gather what remained. It was a good plan. It almost worked. Elias looked directly at him. You miscalculated only one thing. Halloran asked. What? The night you sent your men to do it, a stranger was standing in that parking lot, Elias said. Someone who didn't exist anywhere in your calculations, because your calculations leave no room for people you consider unimportant. She stayed in the rain. She held my sister's head still for 3 minutes and 50 seconds. And that night she asked me a question none of my 8 men had asked. She asked who signed the approval. He stopped. Someone asked the right question before I did. From that moment on, everything followed a path neither you nor I had drawn. Halloran looked at him for a while, then said, "You talk more than your father did." "My father spoke very little and died on a stretcher," Elias replied. Halloran picked up the pen, then put it back down. "You came here to threaten me." "No," Elias said. "I came to tell you the fourth thing. On Monday morning, a woman carried a cardboard box into the Baltimore office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Inside that box was the night shift time card of a man who once worked at the cold storage warehouse at Dock 9, and a message sent at 12:47 in the morning on September 17th, 3 years ago. The warehouse became completely silent. Halloran stood very still, and Elias gave him enough time to understand, because this was the only part he wanted the man to understand fully. "They've had an open investigation into this dock for 18 months, Elias said. "The only thing they were missing was a fourth person inside the warehouse that night. Now they have a name. You know what happens when they have a name." Halloran spoke, his voice turning hoarse. "You let her do that?" "Yes. You know that if they pull this dock apart, they'll pull you out with it." "I know. I have 3 years of records connected to that warehouse. I have good lawyers, and I don't believe I'll go to prison, but I know for certain that I'll lose several years sitting in rooms with recording devices, explaining every line one by one. I knew that before she got out of her car." Halloran said, "Then why didn't you stop her?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Then he said, "Because her brother was 19 years old, and he sent his sister a message saying, 'Don't worry, I'll tell you when I get home.'" He looked around the empty warehouse once, then returned his gaze to Halloran. "And because for 12 years, I made decisions for everyone I loved, and I've just seen where that leads." He turned away. Near the door, he stopped once. "You gave me 7 days, he said. "I'm not giving you any. I'm only telling you that the clock is already running." 31 days later, the 6 o'clock news read exactly 3 lines between 2 other reports. A 52-year-old man was arrested at his Baltimore residence as part of a long-running federal investigation into activities in the Harbor District. 4 other people were also arrested. Investigators said the case was connected to an unresolved traffic death from 3 years earlier. The victim's name wasn't mentioned in the report. In the 7th week, Rosalie had her cast removed. Marin traded shifts so she could be there, and she arrived in Fells Point on Saturday afternoon, carrying a box of pastries from the shop down the street, and Rosalie opened the door with both hands, taking a little longer than necessary because she wanted both of them to see. Her left arm was thinner than her right, the skin pale after 7 weeks without sunlight, and she kept turning her wrist back and forth like someone testing a new hinge. "Do you know the first thing the doctor told me?" she said. "Don't rush." I hate that sentence. In the living room, the cello still stood in the corner beside the window, exactly where it had remained for 7 weeks, and Rosalie still walked around the table instead of going straight across the room. Marin left it alone. They sat drinking tea, and Rosalie talked about the midterm assessment she had been allowed to postpone, and about the friend who had called 11 times and had finally received a call back, and how the 2 of them had talked for 2 hours without once mentioning that night. Then she fell silent. Then she said, without looking at Marin, "You know the words in my phone." Marin set down her cup. "Call this number first. Don't call 911. "Yes." Rosalie turned her wrist one more time. "I typed that myself. Last year. No one told me to. A car passed outside on the street. Your brother doesn't know you wrote it, does he?" Marin said. "He doesn't know anything," Rosalie said. "He thinks I don't know." She said the next words very softly, as though she had practiced them many times inside her head and had never once spoken them aloud. "I've known since my senior year of high school. Not because I saw anything. I've never seen anything. He's very good at making sure of that. It's because I noticed the way he avoids questions. Try asking him where he went today. He'll answer you. The answer will be true, but it will answer a question slightly different from the one you asked. He's been doing that for 10 years, and one afternoon I was sitting in the car and realized I had counted him doing it 3 times. Marin said nothing. "Why didn't you ask him directly?" she said. Rosalie looked down at the hand that had just been freed from the cast. "Because if I asked him directly, he would have to choose," she said. "Either he would lie to me, and I don't think he could lie to me, or he would tell me the truth. And if he told me the truth, the only thing he has managed to preserve from the past 12 years would be gone. He believes he kept me outside of it. That is the only thing that lets him sleep. I wouldn't take that away from him. Rosalie looked up, and her eyes were wet, though her voice remained steady, so I stayed quiet. For 4 years, I let him win. But I'm not stupid either. So last year I typed those words into my phone, in case something happened, and someone needed to call him first, instead of calling some hospital, and letting him find out later. She paused. It turned out I had written the right thing that night. The only difference was that you were the one who called. Then she stood and walked straight through the center of the room without going around the table, and she went to the cello in the corner beside the window. She pulled out the chair. Sitting down took her a little longer than usual, because her 2 broken ribs were still reminding her that they existed. Then she settled the cello against her shoulder. The piece she began to play was the one Maren had heard her mention twice, and had never heard her perform. The opening was slow and spare, a series of low notes following one another, like someone walking through a long corridor. Halfway through the piece, her left hand began to tremble, and she had to stop for a beat, and Maren thought it was over. Rosalie breathed in, adjusted her hand, and continued. She made it through the middle passage. She passed the place she had never managed to pass in 4 years, the section she always abandoned, the section she always said she would finish another day. Then she reached the final note, and held it until the sound faded on its own inside the room. No one applauded. Elias stood in the kitchen doorway with his coat still on, and no one knew how long he had been there. He didn't say anything. He looked at his sister for a long time. Then he nodded once, exactly once, and Rosalie nodded back, and inside those 2 nods was a conversation 4 years long, that both of them understood and neither intended to put into words. That evening, when Maren left, Elias walked her to the front steps. It was late November, cold and clear, and at the end of the street the dark water reflected broken pieces of light. They stood there for a while without speaking. Then he said, "Next week I have my first meeting with the federal investigators. My lawyer says this will last at least 3 years, possibly longer. There will be periods when I won't be allowed to see anyone or go anywhere, and everything I say will be recorded. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because you have the right to know what you're standing beside." Maren looked toward the water. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," he said. "It was the first thing I had done in 3 months, that I didn't have to persuade myself was right." Then he turned toward her. 3 minutes and 50 seconds, he said. "You stood in the rain for 3 minutes and 50 seconds with someone you didn't know, when you had every reasonable excuse to get into your car and drive away. No one paid you. No one saw you. I've spent 34 years among people who only do something when they know exactly what they'll receive in return." He paused. "That wasn't a small thing." Maren didn't answer. She looked down at her hands. "I'm not asking you to wait," he said. "I don't have the right to ask, and I don't want you spending 3 years inside a waiting room. If one day you leave, I'll understand, and I won't send anyone to find you." She remembered something. "Your coat," she said, "from the first night. It's still at my apartment. I should return it. Keep it," he said. "It fits you better." He said it without looking away. "Besides, it gives you a reason to come back." Maren opened her mouth, then closed it again, because she couldn't find a sentence that was both honest and safe. Elias held out his hand slowly, leaving her enough space to pull away if she chose. She didn't. His fingers closed around hers, and they stood that way on the steps of his house, facing the end of the street where the water waited. No one kissed anyone. No one made a promise. Inside the house behind them, the cello began again, slowly, from the first note. There are things in this world that remain true even when no one gives them a name, and if this story leaves anything behind, perhaps it is something an entire harbor filled with power could never buy. What saves a person has never been money or influence. It is 3 minutes and 50 seconds when a stranger chooses to remain in the rain for us. It is the right question asked at the right moment, while everyone else is asking the wrong ones. It is the kindness of someone who isn't paid, who isn't seen, and who does it anyway. Every one of us will someday find ourselves lying beneath some rainstorm of our own, and the only thing we will pray for is that someone chooses to stop. If today's story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and share this video so that each day another meaningful story will be waiting here for you. How do you feel about Maren and Elias's final choice? Please leave a few words in the comments below. We sincerely want to hear the feelings that come from the deepest part of your heart. May you and your family always enjoy good health, happiness, and peace each day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.